Noah Becker hadn't come to this place looking for peace, at least not the kind people usually meant when they used that word. He wasn't running from some dark past, nor was he hoping for reinvention or healing. What he needed was distance. From people, from noise, from the weight of expectations he never signed up for. The property, a thickly wooded plot sitting just outside the town's jurisdictional line, offered that kind of isolation. It had been his brother Daniel's before him, though he never really talked about what led him to buy it, or why he chose to live so far removed from anything resembling a neighborhood. Now it belonged to Noah, passed down with a house that felt too quiet and a past that smelled faintly of secrets. The land was technically private. It was sectioned off, fenced, properly zoned, and excluded from the local residential association by a sliver of legal luck that Daniel had insisted on when finalizing the purchase. It wasn't much, but it mattered. The line, quite literally, ended at his mailbox. On the other side sat a very different kind of world. Manicured lawns, posted rules, friendly patrols. Noah didn't care for that world. He had spent the last 11 years working with the county coroner's office, more comfortable around bodies than brunches, more fluent in pathology reports than small talk. But he wasn't broken. Just precise. His days were shaped by protocols, his mind wired around facts. Death didn't lie, people did. That's why he preferred things that stayed still when you looked at them. The house itself was nothing impressive. 2 stories, weathered shingles, and a porch that creaked like it was sighing every time he stepped onto it. But it was real, solid, the kind of place that didn't pretend to be anything else. Noah had been gradually sorting through Daniel's old things since moving in. Boxes of paperwork, shelves of field notes, and a drawer full of letters he hadn't yet been able to bring himself to read. There was something oddly impersonal about how Daniel had lived, as if he'd expected to be gone long before the house ever started to fall apart. And maybe he had. Noah didn't ask questions when the will arrived, just packed up his apartment in the city, gave notice at work, and left. He liked the sound of the wind in the trees and the way the gravel popped under his boots as he walked the perimeter of the property. He liked checking the locks before bed and organizing the garden shed just because he could. For the first few weeks, things were still. It wasn't happy, but it wasn't haunted either. The isolation felt clean, predictable. And then Karen showed up. It was the second Sunday morning in March. Noah was trimming brush along the fence line when he heard someone calling from the road. A woman, maybe in her 60s, impeccably put together. Pale blue cardigan, hair pinned like it had never known disorder. She waved as if they'd met before, but they hadn't. "Hi there, you must be Noah," she called out with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Noah lowered the shears, brushed off his gloves, and nodded cautiously. "I'm Karen. I'm the community lead for Willow Creek Meadows." She gestured behind her toward the winding rows of identical houses that shared his fence line like a spine. "Just wanted to officially welcome you. I was quite close with your brother." Noah raised an eyebrow at that. Daniel had never mentioned her, but he nodded politely, waiting for the part where she handed over banana bread or a newsletter. Instead, she stepped closer, eyes scanning the property as if cataloging it. "Beautiful piece of land you've got here. Not too common these days to have this much independence." The way she said it made the word sound like a liability, but I suppose Daniel liked to keep to himself, too. She smiled again, tighter this time, and added, "We did try to bring him into the fold, you know. I guess he just wasn't the community type." Noah didn't reply. He could feel her eyes lingering on the tool belt slung over the fence, on the lock he'd just replaced, on the freshly cleared path behind him. She wasn't making conversation. She was taking inventory. "We do have a few ground rules for the area," she continued as if she had any jurisdiction over his land. "Even if you're technically outside the circle, we all like to maintain a certain standard. We take pride in this place. It's not about control, it's about cohesion. He gave her a nod that was neither agreement nor dismissal, just enough to end the exchange. Karen seemed satisfied. For now. She turned with a cheery, "Well, welcome again," and walked back down the road, her shoes crunching across the gravel like glass underfoot. Noah watched her go without moving. He didn't like the way she had spoken about his brother, or how she talked about standards like they were walls with teeth. The next morning, there was a small wooden stake planted right along the edge of his property line. Noah spotted it while watering the front hedge. No note, no flag, just a thin strip of pine dug 4 inches into the earth. He pulled it out, thought nothing of it, and tossed it in the shed. 2 days later, another one appeared. Then a third. He began photographing them, dating each one. He wasn't paranoid, just methodical. Something was off, and the frequency with which it kept happening didn't feel like coincidence. The real shift came when he found the posted notice nailed to the corner of his fence. A bright orange tag stamped Environmental Activity Zone, visual monitoring in effect. There was no agency seal, no contact info, just the implication that he was under observation. Noah called the county. They had no record of any inspection in his area. He called the environmental department. Same answer. When he asked a contact in the sheriff's office whether his name had been flagged for anything unusual, they said no, but paused when he gave the address. That place, the deputy had said, more to himself than to Noah. You're not in the association's list, but they've had some issues over there. Karen returned that weekend, this time with a clipboard and a brochure titled Community Harmony Through Shared Responsibility. She asked if Noah had reconsidered joining. He said no. She mentioned that several neighbors had expressed concerns about the wildlife activity around his property. He told her the deer weren't a threat to anyone. She smiled as if humoring a child and said, "Sometimes it's not about the animals, Noah. Sometimes it's about who attracts them." It was subtle, but not accidental. That same night he heard something clatter against his back gate. When he went to check, there was nothing there. But in the morning, he found fresh scuff marks near the latch and a torn strip of fabric snagged on the hinges. It wasn't from him. He didn't wear synthetic clothes, and the height of the tier was too high for an animal. He didn't call the police. Not yet. It wasn't enough. Not the stakes, not the tag, not even the subtle threat. But something was building. And Noah had the distinct feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't about deer, fences, or bylaws. It was about leverage, about control. And someone, somewhere, believed he could be pushed. He had been wrong before, about people, about how far they'd go to feel powerful. But this wasn't a mistake he intended to repeat. Noah had learned long ago to listen to the tension in silence, the subtle edge that told him something was about to shift before it actually did. It wasn't paranoia, not in his line of work, just instinct sharpened by years around crime scenes and autopsy tables. The dead never lied, but the living always had tells. On the 5th morning of his 3rd week at the property, Noah felt that shift. Something in the air had changed, and when he stepped outside, he saw a cruiser parked just beyond the gate, engine idling. The officer who stepped out looked more bored than concerned. Tall, in his 30s, he held a notepad like he already knew what he'd write down. "Mr. Becker?" he asked. Noah gave a short nod. "Got a call this morning, anonymous tip. Said you've been discharging weapons near a residential boundary. Hunting activity, possibly illegal." His tone was professional, but the underlying message was clear. It didn't matter whether it was true. Someone was trying to drag Noah into the light. Noah gestured toward the property with an open palm. "Have a look." The officer took his time, walked the boundary, looked in the shed, saw no weapons, no blood, no traps, only tools, some brush piles, and deer tracks. After 20 minutes, he flipped his notebook shut and said, "Doesn't look like anything's happening here. Just keep in mind, folks around here are jumpy. One noise, one shadow. Expect more of this." Noah didn't reply. He watched the cruiser drive away, dust curling behind the tires. He waited until silence returned and then went to the edge of his property. There, in the brush by the back fence, he found footprints. 2 sets. Flat-soled boots. Not his. That evening, he installed a second trail cam, hidden in the trees, facing the only spot on his land not already under watch. The next morning, he found a small paper bag placed directly in front of his door. It was knotted shut with surgical care. Inside, bloodied feathers. Chicken, maybe. No note, no tracks, just that silent message. "We know where you live." He burned the bag whole, didn't untie the knot. On Wednesday, another cruiser. Different officer, same story. Another anonymous call. This time, more specific. Tall male in a black jacket, seen carrying a crossbow. Noah didn't own a crossbow. He asked for the name of the caller. "Anonymous," the officer said again. Noah didn't have to ask further. He already knew. That afternoon, a new sign appeared near the driveway. "Protected Wildlife Survey Area. Entry prohibited." No agency, no phone number. Just a deer silhouette and a laminated sheet hammered into the dirt. When he pulled it out, he noticed a faint carving at the base. K.S. Karen Simmons. She wasn't hiding anymore. Noah went to the regional wildlife office, confirmed there were no inspections scheduled for his land or the adjacent woods. He asked for an official letter stating so and had it notarized. When he returned home, his gate had been opened. Not forced, just unlatched. Deliberate, measured. He reviewed the camera footage. Nothing. Whoever had done it either found the blind spot or used a jammer. That night, something glinted outside the kitchen window. Noah turned off the interior lights and stared out. Lodged in the bark of a tree just beyond the fence. A hunting dart. It was blunt, but unmistakable. Meant to be seen. Meant to send a message. He didn't report it. He started documenting everything instead. The next morning, a package with no return address sat in his mailbox. Inside, a pair of cheap binoculars and a plastic walkie-talkie painted in camouflage. At first, it seemed like a prank until he opened the walkie and found that the battery had been removed and replaced with a small transmitter. Not active anymore. But someone had been using it, listening, recording. He crushed the items and buried them behind the woodshed. That same day, he called an attorney who specialized in property harassment. Then he called a private security consultant. He didn't accuse anyone directly. He just laid out the facts. "They're not just watching me," he said. "They're setting a stage." The security consultant didn't hesitate. "That's what this looks like," he said. "Calls to the police with no evidence, signs, objects left near your home, environmental claims. They're building a profile. If this escalates and you defend yourself, you're already on paper as a suspicious individual." Noah asked what would happen if someone like Karen called the police during a confrontation, crying, saying she feared for her life. "If she calls first," the man said flatly, "you'll be in handcuffs before you can explain." That night, Noah sat on the porch with a pen and a yellow legal pad. He began writing down every detail. Times, dates, names, weather conditions, what he found, what he heard, what he said and didn't say. He wasn't going to be caught without a record. The following day, he found something new. His mailbox had been filled not with mail, but with shredded paper, wet and clumped like pulp. No markings, no envelope. It had been stuffed in by hand. It dripped down his jeans when he reached inside. Across the street, Karen was out walking her tiny white dog. She waved cheerfully like nothing had happened. It was then Noah understood. She wasn't just trying to provoke him. She was preparing the ground for something bigger. And if he didn't get ahead of it, if he didn't stay measured, meticulous, and quiet, she'd find a way to twist everything he did into exactly what she needed. A threat. The next wave didn't arrive with warning or sound. It began with silence. Heavy, pressing, the kind that settled too early in the day and lasted too long into the evening. Noah noticed it first when the birds that usually clustered near the trees by the southern fence stopped coming. He wasn't one to romanticize nature, but he noticed patterns. It wasn't just birdsong. It was absence, and it crept through the landscape like something watching from the shadows. He doubled his perimeter check, walked with gloves on and a flashlight even during daylight, not because he expected danger, but because he no longer trusted what might be waiting out of sight. On a gray Thursday morning, as he made his way along the northern boundary, Noah stopped mid-step. Set just inside the fence, precisely 5 inches beyond the line, was a crude metal trap. Snapped open, its jaw locked in place, rusted but functional. He crouched beside it, noting the soil disturbance, the way the grass had been deliberately folded to conceal its outline. He didn't touch it. Instead, he photographed it from 3 angles, then took a small orange flag marker from his pocket — he had started carrying them the week prior — and placed it next to the trap. It was a clear signal, if anyone was watching. "I saw what you did, and I'm not pretending otherwise." He reported the incident to the county's wildlife services. They sent a ranger that afternoon, a quiet woman named Calloway with a tired smile and a clipboard. She walked the perimeter with him, found 2 more traps, one by the creek bed, another by the compost bins, and shook her head slowly. "You didn't set these," she said, not as a question but a confirmation. He shook his head once. "They're illegal," she added, "not just because of where they are, but because of what they're built for. This is for maiming, not trapping." She documented everything, took the traps for evidence, and gave Noah her card. That evening, Karen stood by the shared corner of their properties, pretending to prune a bush that hadn't grown in 3 years. She waved the shears in his direction without looking up, an offhand gesture, and called out, "Careful walking through those trees. I hear someone's been setting traps." Then she laughed lightly, a sound with no warmth, and disappeared behind her hedges. Noah didn't respond. He just watched the spot where she'd been for several seconds longer than necessary. That night he walked the woods twice. His cameras captured nothing new, but at 3:47 a.m., a motion sensor went off behind the garage. He checked the footage in real time, just static. It lasted 23 minutes before clarity returned. He saved the file anyway, even the silence, even the noise of failure. Everything was a clue now. The next escalation was subtle in execution, but violent in intention. Noah returned home from town to find that his front gate had been painted, just a single line of red running from top hinge to bottom latch. Not blood, not paint from a can. Marker ink, industrial grade, thick and waterproof. A mark, not vandalism, like someone had tagged the edge of a cage. Inside his mailbox between the regular letters was a folded piece of printer paper. No message, just an image. A thermal map. Not labeled, not time-stamped, but it was of his house. The heat signatures matched the night before. The kitchen, lit. His bedroom, dark. The silhouette of his body, faint but visible, walking from one to the other. He didn't call the police. He called Calloway. She came back the next day, no clipboard this time. She listened as he described the image. Her face didn't change, but her posture shifted. "You still have it?" He nodded, handed it over. She didn't ask to keep it, just took a picture of it on her phone and muttered, "You're not the first to get one of these." Noah felt something tighten in his spine. She explained slowly that there had been complaints filed over the last 6 months about boundary tension in the area. Residents accusing one another of encroachment, sabotage, property theft. Most of them trace back to this end of the neighborhood, she said carefully. Same pattern, same escalation, but you're the first one who hasn't folded. When he asked who filed the complaints, she hesitated, then gave a small nod toward Karen's lot. "I can't say it directly," she said, "but if I were you, I'd start thinking about who benefits from people feeling like they don't belong here." He already had. That night, Noah found a box placed neatly beneath his porch bench. Inside were pieces of raw meat, cheap cuts, pork shoulder or similar, but spoiled, slick with decay and crawling with flies. At the bottom was a small plastic vial of white powder, unmarked, unsealed. It wasn't just a message. It was a trap, likely for animals, possibly for him. He called the ranger station again. This time, Calloway arrived with 2 other officers. They took the box, photographed the area, and began speaking in quieter tones. One of them asked Noah if he had pets. He didn't. "Good," they said. Later, as they were loading up the evidence, Calloway lingered. "You need to watch your back," she said. "She plays the long game. She'll push you until you make a mistake, and when you do, she'll have everything she needs to bury you in process." Noah didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch until morning, shotgun across his lap. Not as a threat, but as a measure of time, as if its weight alone could keep him grounded. The forest felt smaller. The world felt narrow. But he was still there. The next day brought a new level of theater. Noah returned from checking the back lot to find Karen standing on the easement, right at the edge of the boundary. She had a folder in one hand and something long in the other. He realized as he stepped closer that it was a hunting rifle. She wasn't pointing it, yet, but it was unholstered, slung low, ready. "You've been scaring the local deer," she said. Her voice was casual, almost amused. "They don't come near anymore. Some of us like watching them." Noah kept his tone level. "You're on my property." "Am I?" she said, tilting her head. "I think we both know the lines around here are a little blurry." She lifted the rifle an inch, just enough to make the gesture real. Not aimed, just offered. The threat in it wasn't loud. It was precise. "You need to take a break from this place," she added. "Get some air. Clear your head." Then she turned and walked back, like nothing had happened. He called the sheriff's department, filed the report. They sent a deputy who didn't hide his discomfort when hearing the story. "Karen Simmons," he asked. "Are you sure?" Noah didn't answer. The deputy wrote it down anyway. A week later, a yellow slip appeared taped to his gate. "Community ordinance violation, noxious activity on private land. No citation number, no agency listed. Just a vague threat and a note at the bottom. Failure to comply may result in enforcement measures." He took it inside, photographed it, then burned it. Everything that was happening now felt like a build-up, not an end. Karen was done sending warnings. She was watching for his mistake, and he wasn't going to give her one. Not yet. Noah didn't believe in paranoia. Not in the way people used it to discredit fear that came from logic. What he believed in was escalation, and what he saw now was exactly that. Every move Karen had made over the past month was deliberate, methodical, and meant not to force him off the land overnight, but to break down the legitimacy of his presence piece by piece until it looked like he didn't belong there. It wasn't vandalism, it was strategy, and people like her didn't gamble unless they'd already secured the leverage. The day the county surveyor showed up, Noah was already waiting. He had seen the marked vehicle crawl past his road twice that morning and knew it wasn't a coincidence. The man was polite but evasive. Said there had been a request to reevaluate the boundary markers on contested lots. Noah asked who filed the request. The man shrugged. "Anonymous," he said, "but formal. Comes through committee. You're on the list." Noah didn't stop him. He followed as the man walked along the perimeter with a GPS reader and a clipboard, making quiet calculations, pausing near the northern oak line, then writing something and quickly folding the paper. "What's the problem?" Noah asked. The man shook his head, not unkindly. "It's not a problem. It's just, your eastern line may have shifted on the records. That happens sometimes with older properties. Technically, that shed near your fence could be counted as encroaching now. It's minor, but it'll trigger a notice." Noah didn't need him to say it aloud. The shed had been there for 15 years. His brother had poured the foundation himself. A shift on paper meant someone had pulled strings, not to steal land outright, but to create a trail of legitimacy. Once the survey was on file, the next steps would come. Fines, hearings, perhaps even eviction motions framed as procedural compliance. He thanked the man, closed the gate, and called his attorney. The next morning, an envelope appeared in his mailbox. No stamp, no sender. Inside were photocopied pages. 3 complaints filed to the county's Nuisance Enforcement Board, one citing excessive ambient noise at his address, another alleging frequent wildlife luring through inappropriate feed, and the third simply marked safety concern, erratic behavior, all anonymous. All obviously fabricated, but they were now in the system. His lawyer, a woman named Landry, didn't waste time. "They're building a public file," she said. "Even if none of this is criminal, it builds a narrative. A homeowner with a string of complaints, questionable property lines, and known friction with neighbors? You're being painted as a liability, not a victim. They're setting up for a board action or private lawsuit. The goal is to make you look unstable and litigious." Noah stared at the copy of the wildlife complaint, his name at the top, the language sterile and clinical. Subject may be engaged in unauthorized baiting activity. Unconfirmed but observed behavior includes unusual late-night movement and the presence of meat scraps near perimeter. He didn't need to guess how they got that information. Someone had seen the rotted pork he'd reported weeks ago and flipped the story. That was how this worked. She poisoned the soil, then claimed he was the one planting rotten things. Landry filed motions to dismiss the claims, attaching sworn statements and evidence from the wildlife ranger. But even dismissed, they remained public record. The smears had already done their job. Noah kept his movements sharp and minimal. He didn't go into town unless necessary. He spoke only to officials and delivery drivers. He added motion-activated lights along the blind spot behind the garage and a second lock to the tool shed. But he also knew the next move wouldn't be physical. It would be reputational. He was right. The following Friday, a letter arrived from the neighborhood mediation office. Not a court summons, but a notice of community concern. A bureaucratic invention used to force disputes into documented discussion. The notice claimed that a representative from the residential council had received reports that Noah had repeatedly made other residents feel unsafe through verbal escalation and posturing. He had never raised his voice in public. He had never threatened anyone. But Karen didn't need truth. She just needed momentum. Noah could have ignored the meeting, but Landry advised him to attend, to record everything, and to remain controlled. The mediation office was inside a rented room behind a public library. Neutral ground. Inside, the moderator was a retired city worker who offered weak coffee and a firm handshake. Karen arrived 6 minutes late, smiling as though they were old friends. She carried a thin folder and wore a pin shaped like a dove. Noah said nothing. He sat with his hands flat on the table, his voice steady. Karen spoke first. She said that she had tried for weeks to build a connection, but had been met with hostility. That neighbors had expressed unease with Noah's presence, and that the energy on the block had changed since his arrival. She never mentioned the traps, the gun, or the false calls. She spoke in passive phrases, detached from action, framing herself as a witness to growing unease. The moderator asked Noah if he had anything to add. He handed over a folder. Inside were copies of every report, every notice, photographs of the traps, the meat box, the surveillance equipment, the paint line, the fabricated complaints. The moderator flipped through them slowly. He stopped at the thermal image, frowning. Karen's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened on the edge of her folder. Noah said only one thing. "I don't want mediation. I want protection from harassment. I want the record to show that I have requested legal distance, not compromise." The moderator nodded, unsure. "We're not a court," he said, "but this will go on file." Karen left first. Noah stayed in the room, breathing in the fluorescent silence. He hadn't won, not yet, but for the first time, she hadn't controlled the narrative. That night, a single nail was left standing upright in his driveway. When he ran it over the next morning, his tire blew out just as he was pulling onto the road. He didn't have proof, but he had confirmation. This was war by procedure, and he wasn't stepping back. After the mediation session, Noah expected quiet. Not peace. He was long past hoping for that, but a temporary lull, the eye of a slow-moving storm. What he got instead was escalation so calculated it felt less like harassment and more like orchestration. The kind of pressure that didn't hit all at once but came in waves, disguised as coincidence, cloaked in policy, and delivered with a smile. It began with a notice pinned to his door, not mailed, not stamped, just taped there in the dead of night. Inspection required, Lot 48. Verification of perimeter modifications. No logo, no reference to a governing body. Just a signature block labeled District Oversight Subcommittee and a date, 3 days from now. He hadn't modified anything. But he already knew that wasn't the point. He called Landry the next morning. She sighed as soon as he finished reading it to her. "They're trying to create failure through compliance," she said. "An unauthorized inspection means someone's faking jurisdiction. But if you deny access, it'll be labeled as non-cooperation. If you allow it, they'll invent a violation." He asked if he should call the sheriff. "Not yet," she said. "Document everything. We need a paper trail longer than theirs." Noah took photos of the note, of his fence, of his entire yard from 4 angles. He printed the time-stamped security cam footage from the night before and filed it next to the other folder marked Incidents. Then he waited. When the date on the notice arrived, no one came. But that evening, while walking his perimeter, he found a small black plastic tie affixed to one of the fence posts, industrial grade, looped tightly with a tag that read simply, Inspected, DS-48. That same night, the floodlights on the east side of the house cut out. When Noah checked the wiring, he found that the power line had been sliced clean. Not chewed, not frayed, but cut with precision. Someone had brought tools. Someone had taken their time. The next day brought noise. It started with a delivery truck. An unmarked van that barreled down his drive, parked crookedly, and dumped 3 heavy boxes labeled Agricultural Treatment. Noah hadn't ordered anything. The man with the clipboard didn't seem to care. "Address says 48 Ridge Hollow," he said. "That you?" When Noah nodded, the man shrugged. "You sign or not, I still gotta leave it. You got 5 gallons of lime fertilizer here. Dangerous stuff. Don't let it near water." Noah didn't sign. He let the man leave, then opened one of the boxes with gloves. Inside was not fertilizer. It was sawdust mixed with powdered insecticide. Harmless on its own, but if spilled near a septic runoff line, it would trigger an environmental violation. And if someone just happened to report it there, it would look like a code breach. He stored the boxes in the garage, sealed them, photographed everything, and filed a report with the environmental office, copying Landry on the email. "This isn't harassment anymore," she replied. "This is premeditated removal. They're trying to set you up to be evicted on regulatory grounds." Later that week, the garbage pickup skipped his address. Not just once, but twice. When he called the waste service, they said they'd received a service pause request from his phone number. He checked his call log. Nothing. Someone had spoofed his number. Then the post office marked his mailbox temporarily vacant. Packages were returned. Registered letters went missing. At first, he thought it was clerical error. Then he found the note. Delivery halted per resident request. Undergoing transition. It was taped inside the mailbox, not postmarked, typed, like someone was rehearsing his disappearance before it happened. Karen's presence became less direct but more frequent. She was no longer lingering with tools or folders. Now she simply walked by each evening as if on routine, pausing just long enough at his gate to suggest familiarity. She never looked directly at the cameras, never stepped over the line, but each appearance felt deliberate. One night she left behind a bag of lemons at the foot of his driveway with a note, "For your sour mood. Lighten up." He didn't touch them, didn't throw them away, just logged it. Another line in the ledger. The following weekend, his landline rang, an internal circuit he rarely used and hadn't given out. The voice on the other end was calm, female, unfamiliar. "You have 10 days before your water is flagged. Relocate the compost and do not contact external agencies again." Then the line went dead. He checked the number. Private. He called Landry. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she asked, "Did she say flagged or tested?" He repeated the word. "Flagged." Landry's voice dropped. "They're moving on utilities now. If they can get the county to declare your water source compromised, you'll be issued a compliance order. And that gives them legal entry." 2 days later, county inspectors arrived. Noah didn't argue. He let them in. He followed them around the well, the septic tank, the utility boxes. They tested, poked, nodded. One of them, an older man with weather-worn hands, glanced at Noah and said quietly, "You got people in this neighborhood who don't like your kind of privacy." Then he handed over a clean test result and walked away. But the presence of the state changed the temperature. After that visit, 2 more cars began appearing near his road in the evenings. One with government plates, one without. They never pulled in. Just parked for 30 minutes, then left. He installed another trail cam, then another. One caught footage of a figure stepping out briefly, hood up, walking 20 paces toward the fence, then retreating. The image was too blurry to identify, but the posture was unmistakable. It was Karen. He printed the still, filed it, and sent it to Landry with one sentence. "She's not waiting anymore." The final trigger came with a knock, not on his door, but on the side panel of his truck. He was loading supplies when he heard it and turned to see a man in a maintenance vest holding a clipboard. "Inspection for your propane," the man said. "We're checking for storage violations." Noah didn't have propane. Never had. He told the man to leave. The man refused. "This is routine," he said. "You deny access. I have to mark it as non-compliant." Noah stepped between the man and the house. "Call your supervisor," he said. The man blinked, then nodded and walked away. That night, Noah slept with one eye open. The next morning, red flags were staked along the edge of his garden. Property markers, survey lines, freshly placed. Labeled not with county logos, but with the initials CRF, Community Residential Foundation, a nonprofit linked to neighborhood development projects. He looked them up. One of the board members was Karen Simmons. He didn't dig deeper. He didn't have to. The message was clear. This wasn't a dispute anymore. It was a siege. Noah felt it in his bones before he saw it. The weight of something inevitable, something that had taken its time to crawl toward him, was finally pressing right up against the walls of his house. The tension that had been steadily building through every anonymous complaint, every false report, every twisted version of events delivered through official-looking letters, now stood outside his home like it had a key. He wasn't afraid. He was exhausted, and that was far more dangerous. Exhaustion made people reactive. It dulled the line between strategy and instinct, and if they had been trying to corner him into a mistake, they were closer than ever. That morning started like any other. No new flags, no strangers on the road. For the first time in weeks, the air felt still. But stillness wasn't safety, not in this context. Noah left to run a short errand into town, nothing out of the ordinary. When he returned 20 minutes later, there was a silver SUV parked halfway up his drive. It didn't belong to anyone he knew. He cut the engine early, scanned the area. No visible damage, no broken gate. The vehicle wasn't blocking his entrance. It was just there, like it was supposed to be. As he pulled up closer, he saw her, Karen, standing just outside the open driver's side door, no clipboard this time, no pamphlet in hand. She was dressed differently, jeans, boots, a dark jacket zipped to her chin. Her posture wasn't casual. She looked like someone who had finally stopped pretending. What was once passive-aggressive was now just aggressive. Her gaze was direct, and in her hands was a padded black case. Noah stepped out of his truck slowly, not raising his voice, not stepping toward her. She didn't say anything at first. She just placed the case on the hood of her vehicle and unlatched it without breaking eye contact. Inside was a rifle, scoped, clean. She didn't point it. She didn't need to. "This ends now," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like a warning that thought it was a fact. "You've disrupted this neighborhood long enough. You're not above the rules just because you think you're smarter than the rest of us." Noah didn't move. He didn't answer. He simply backed away 3 measured steps, turned, and walked into his house. He locked the door, then called the sheriff's department. Then he called Landry. "She brought a weapon to my driveway," he said, his voice calm but shaking in the back of his throat. "She opened the case. I didn't provoke her. I didn't speak." Landry told him not to confront her again. "Let the officers see it. Let them make the report. Do not escalate." When the deputies arrived 15 minutes later, Karen was sitting in the SUV, window down, the case now conveniently closed and stored. Her expression was serene, even pleasant. She told them that she was simply on a neighborhood patrol, that Noah had been acting erratically, and that she had the rifle for safety. She said she never took it out. She said he was fabricating the event to retaliate against her leadership in the community. Noah handed the deputy a flash drive. "Every angle," he said. "Every second. It's all there." The deputies didn't arrest her. They didn't confiscate the weapon. They let her go. But something in the air cracked. The performance was wearing thin. The narrative was breaking apart. That night, Landry filed for an emergency protective order. Included in her filing were weeks of collected evidence, images of tampered utilities, falsified survey flags, anonymous threats, and now this. The rifle, the case, the camera footage that didn't lie, even if the person in front of it did. A hearing was scheduled, this time with urgency. For the first time, the system blinked. Noah didn't feel victorious. He felt watched, not just by Karen, but by something larger. This didn't feel like one person anymore. This felt like a machine, like he'd tripped something that wasn't just local, and now it was pushing back hard. He wasn't facing a neighbor. He was facing an infrastructure. Quiet power. Small, invasive pressure from people who had always gotten their way because no one had the energy or resources to say no. 2 nights later, one of the motion detectors lit up behind the shed. Noah checked the camera feed, grainy but usable. A figure had crossed into his yard. Not Karen. Taller. Lean. The person moved quickly as if they knew the layout. They stopped near the compost line, crouched, and buried something. Then they left. In the morning, Noah dug there carefully. What he found was a sealed plastic sleeve. Inside was a printed photograph. His house taken from a distance, black and white. The outline of his porch barely visible through tree branches. On the back of the photo, written in ink that had smudged slightly from the soil, "No one outlasts the circle." He stood there for a long time, holding that message in his hands, feeling how deeply the threat had grown roots in his life. This was no longer just Karen. This was something connected, something bigger, something emboldened by quiet authority and weaponized civility. The kind of threat that smiled in the daylight and slithered through policy at night. But if they thought this would make him run, they hadn't been paying attention, because Noah Becker wasn't built to run. No one showed up with an apology. Not the officers who had shrugged at clear threats. Not the county workers who had mysteriously appeared just when a file was being built against him. Not the neighbors who had watched silently as Karen tried to erase him with paperwork and polite violence. But something shifted. It didn't make a sound. It didn't arrive with headlines. It moved the way pressure lifts when the hand holding it begins to retreat. The restraining order was granted. Temporary at first, but strong enough to hold her back. The judge didn't call her a danger, but he did say her behavior demonstrated a sustained and strategic pattern of intimidation and encroachment designed to destabilize the occupant's claim to peaceful residency. That was the language Landry had fought for. Clinical, legal, but cutting. Karen was barred from coming within 100 meters of his property. She didn't contest it. She didn't show up. In the days that followed, the silence that returned to the property felt different from the silence that had preceded the storm. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't coiled. It was just still. For the first time in months, Noah walked the full perimeter of his land without watching over his shoulder. The survey flags were gone. The boxes of fertilizer were quietly collected by a disposal crew that left no name. The fake citations stopped. No new complaints were filed. Deliveries resumed. Garbage was picked up on schedule. Even the local post office, once mysteriously hesitant, began dropping off mail again without hesitation. Karen's house remained standing, but closed off. Her car disappeared from the driveway. Her windows stayed dark. A neighbor told him, without being asked, that she went to stay with family for a while. No further details. No follow-ups. It was like she'd been quietly removed, not by law, not officially, but as part of some invisible agreement that she'd pushed too far, too openly. The game only worked when it stayed unspoken. Karen had made it obvious, and that made her a liability. Noah didn't feel vindicated. He didn't feel safer either. What he felt was clarity. He understood now how easily order could be bent, how authority wasn't always held by those in uniform, but often by the ones who understood the slow violence of paperwork and whispers. What had happened to him could happen to anyone. All it took was the right person in the right position, who knew how to press just hard enough without leaving bruises. He kept the folders. He didn't burn the evidence. Everything stayed in the cabinet, labeled, ordered, with copies locked in cloud storage and offline drives, not out of paranoia, but out of respect, for what it had taken to stay standing. He didn't want revenge. He wanted memory. Weeks passed. One evening, an older man from the neighborhood stopped at the edge of his drive. He didn't step onto the property. He didn't speak right away. Then he said quietly, "She did this to someone else, a couple years ago. They left, sold for cheap. I didn't say anything then." Noah nodded once, said nothing. The man added, "I'm sorry, I should have." The moment hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't rise. Noah didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. The truth had always been there, buried beneath compliance and courtesies. What mattered now was that it had been named. Later, he sat on his porch, not to watch, not to guard, but simply because the night was quiet. The trees moved like they used to. The air was clean. The land, for all its scars, still felt like his. Not because of any court order or fence line, but because he had refused to let anyone rewrite the reality of where he belonged. They had tried to make him a ghost, but Noah Becker hadn't vanished. He was still there, and now everyone knew it.